While camping deep in Alaska's untamed forests, my son left me stranded without food or gear, smirking as he said, "Bye. Go meet the grizzly." He believed I would starve or fall prey to a bear so he could claim my inheritance. But when he returned home, I was already there, smiling. "I have a surprise for you," I said. "You won't believe what happens next." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. The front door burst open without warning. Mason stormed in, his hoodie soaked from the Seattle drizzle, sneakers squeaking on the hardwood. "Dad, I need $5,000 right now." I froze at my desk, pen still in hand from reviewing invoices. The sharp edge in his voice hit me like a slap. This wasn't a son asking for help, this was someone issuing a demand. "Mason, what?" I asked. $5,000. Tonight. He paced the living room, fists clenched. "I already transferred your monthly allowance last week. That $3,000 barely covers my rent." His voice cracked with frustration. "You think that's enough? That covers everything?" My flannel shirt felt suddenly too tight. Grease still stained my fingers from fixing Mrs. Chen's transmission earlier. I'd built these auto shops from scratch, worked 18-hour days after Sarah died, sacrificed everything to give him opportunities one never had. "Son, we've talked about this. You need steady work," I said, trying to keep calm. "Work?" Mason spun around, face flushed red. "Why should I work when you sit on all this money? When you control everything like a dictator?" The accusation stung. I straightened my back, military posture kicking in. "I'm trying to teach you responsibility." "Responsibility?" He laughed bitterly. "You want to know about responsibility? After you're gone, I'll run your auto shops. Better than you ever did." The words hung in the air, poisonous. My chest tightened. The casual way he spoke of my death. The calculation behind his eyes. This wasn't grief or frustration, it was greed. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. 20 years of single parenting, sacrifice, hoping he'd grow into a man his mother would have been proud of, all collapsed in that instant. Mason must have seen the shock on my face. His expression shifted as he realized he'd said too much. Without another word, he spun toward the door. The slam echoed like a gunshot, rattling the family photo on the mantel, Sarah's smiling face trembling behind the glass. I stood frozen by my desk, pen clutched in white-knuckled hands, watching it settle. Outside, Mason's engine roared to life, fading into the distance. The next morning, I reached up to straighten the family photo. Sarah's young, radiant face smiled back, holding 8-year-old Mason at his Little League game. The memory hit like a punch. Sarah's funeral. Mason in his only suit, 3 sizes too big, clutching my hand as I tried not to collapse. The first shop's mortgage was 3 months behind. Sarah's medical bills had drained our savings. I'd promised her, on her deathbed, that I'd take care of him, give him everything she couldn't. By Thursday, I found myself flipping through old photo albums. Each page revealed another sacrifice I'd almost forgotten: Mason's private school tuition, $40,000 a year because the public schools weren't enough. His University of Washington education, including the dorm he demanded. The Honda Civic I bought for graduation, $18,000 in cash because he refused anything used. I traced the edges of a photo from his 16th birthday. Even then, something was missing in his eyes. While other teens worked summer jobs, Mason spent his days gaming, living off the allowances I justified as investments in his future. The pattern was clear now, spread across decades. Every handout, every rescued failure, every crisis I solved with my checkbook had chipped away pieces of his character. I'd thought I was a good father. Instead, I'd raised a stranger who calculated my death like a business deal. Saturday evening, I sat in Sarah's old chair, the one I could never remove. She would have seen this coming. Sarah always understood people better than I did. She would have made him earn every dollar, guided him toward independence. I whispered to the empty room. "I failed you. The realization sank into my bones like winter frost. 20 years trying to buy Mason's love to compensate for the mother he'd lost. Every payment a bandage over my guilt, my inadequacy. I'd convinced myself that providing for him was the same as parenting him. Sunday morning, I returned the albums to their shelf and sat at my desk. My hands shook slightly as I reached for pen and paper. Military discipline steadied my breath. I had to think clearly now, plan for possibilities I'd never wanted to consider. The blank page stared back, waiting for decisions I wasn't ready to make. 1 ring, 2 rings. My pen hovered over legal documents I'd been drafting when the phone shattered the silence. Mason's name glowed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Hello, son." "Dad?" "Hey, how's it going?" His voice was artificially bright, almost painful in its cheerfulness. Too polished, too eager, like a salesman's pitch. "I'm good. Just didn't expect your call after last week's talk." "Yeah, about that," he said quickly. "I know I overstepped, and I want to make things right." The words rushed out rehearsed. "Actually, I've got a plan. Something that could fix everything between us." I stayed silent. Years of military discipline had taught me the power of waiting. "Let's go camping." "Alaska. Denali National Park. Just the 2 of us. Like when I was a kid, remember?" The words hit me like a jolt. Mason hadn't shown any interest in outdoor adventures since high school. "This is sudden." I know, he said. "But my friends canceled last minute. And these tickets, they're about to go to waste. Flights, gear, park permits, all paid for. Expires tomorrow if we don't use it." My grip on the phone tightened. The urgency felt staged, designed to push me before I could think. "Mason, when have you ever arranged camping trips? Come on, Dad. Remember teaching me to read tracks, start fires with wet wood? You always said the wilderness shows a man's true character." The reference twisted something inside me. Those had been good times, before Sarah's death, before I tried to solve every problem with money instead of attention. This could be our chance to reconnect. Mason continued, his tone softening. "Remember what we had. No distractions, no city chaos, just father and son, alone in God's country." I closed my eyes. Hope and instinct warred inside me. Every rational part of my brain screamed caution: the timing, the sudden enthusiasm, the convenient story about cancelled friends, it all smelled orchestrated. But beneath that suspicion was a faint, aching hope. What if this was genuine? What if my son truly wanted to rebuild what we'd lost? "The flights leave March 25th, he pressed. "Seattle to Anchorage. Then we drive to the park. 5 days out there, just like old times." 5 days, I repeated slowly. "Dad, please. These tickets are going to waste, and this might be our last chance to fix what's broken." Silence stretched between us. I stared at the papers on my desk, legal documents meant to guard against futures I prayed would never come. "All right," I said finally. "Let's do it." "Really? That's awesome. I'll text you the flight info. Meet me at SeaTac Gate. This is going to be incredible, Dad. You'll see." The line went dead. I set the phone down, hand trembling slightly. Outside, Seattle's drizzle painted patterns across the window. I looked back at the documents, then at the pen in my hand. Hope and preparation, both felt like betrayal. 3 days later, I folded the legal documents and slid them into the inner pocket of my travel bag. They felt heavier than they should, full of unwanted possibilities. Mason waited at gate C12, bouncing on his heels like a teenager who hadn't learned patience. His backpack looked brand new, tags still attached. When he saw me, his grin stretched too wide. "Dad!" "Perfect timing. They just called boarding." "You seem excited," I said, studying him closely. Military training had taught me to read tension hidden as enthusiasm. That twitch in his left eye said more than his grin ever could. He hoisted the pack onto his shoulder with effort. When's the last time we did something like this? On the first flight, he talked nonstop about wilderness photography and fresh air. Consulted his phone more than seemed necessary for someone disconnecting. I shared Navy survival stories, reading weather, identifying edible plants, navigating without GPS. You really know all this stuff? He asked, scribbling notes on a napkin. 20 years in the service teaches you to be ready for anything. A flicker crossed his face. Admiration? Or calculation disguised as it? Our layover stretched longer than expected. Mason excused himself 3 times, each break lasting 20 minutes. Through the terminal windows, I watched planes taxi under the gray sky, Alaska inching closer. The final flight carried us over jagged mountains, their peaks like broken teeth. Mason pressed his face to the window, but his reflection betrayed tension, not wonder. Anchorage hit us with crisp air and the scent of snow. At the rental counter, I handled paperwork, Toyota 4Runner, extra insurance, chains for mountain roads, while Mason loaded our gear, favoring his right shoulder like it ached. Next, we need to hit an outdoor store, he said, consulting his phone. At Northern Exposure Outfitters, he insisted on high-powered flashlights, emergency flares, ropes. Far more than necessary for standard camping. The clerk, a weathered man with frostbitten scars, raised an eyebrow. Just being prepared, Mason said quickly. Highway 3 stretched before us like a gray ribbon through endless forest, mountains rising on either side, snowcaps catching the last light. Beautiful country, I said, trying to break the silence. Yeah. Pretty isolated, Mason replied, satisfaction in his voice. Miles from anywhere. We stopped for gas as darkness fell. While I pumped fuel, Mason wandered toward the convenience store. Through the fluorescent windows, I watched him pull out his phone, voice low and urgent. Back in the car, I asked casually, "Everything okay?" "Just checking weather for tomorrow," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Storm system moving in, clears by morning." The lie slid out too easily. I checked myself. Clear skies for the next 3 days. As we merged back onto the highway, a familiar, gut-tightening unease settled in. The same instinct that had kept me alive in hostile zones. Something was wrong. I just couldn't place it. 40 miles later, the gas station conversation still gnawed at me. So, what did the weather service actually say? Mason's hand tightened around the door handle. Possible snow flurries? He asked, his voice attempting casualness. Nothing serious, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. His evasive answer only reinforced my suspicion. Good thing we packed extra layers, I added. The entrance to Denali came into view around a bend, wooden signs marking the park's limits, cabins scattered among towering spruce. The visitor center was alive with early morning activity, even in March. Most tourists came in summer. These early visitors were either hardened outdoorsmen or locals. Denali Lodge Motel looked exactly like the brochure Mason had shown me. Rustic logs, rooms named Grizzly Den, Caribou Creek, the sort of curated wilderness aesthetic meant to inspire all. The desk clerk, a young woman with roughened hands, processed our check-in while Mason studied the trail maps pinned to the wall. First time at Denali? She asked. For him? I nodded toward Mason. I've been here before military exercises, I said. And which trails are you planning to tackle? Mason stepped in before I could answer. Tlanica River backcountry. We want the full wilderness experience. The clerk's brow furrowed. That's advanced terrain, very remote. Most people start with shorter, safer loops. We're experienced campers, Mason insisted, though his definition of experience seemed to exclude a decade without an actual trip. Park Ranger Jennifer Walsh exuded competence, confidence, authority, and the calm decisiveness of someone used to handling every wilderness emergency imaginable. The briefing room smelled of coffee and pine, walls covered with topographic maps and wildlife photographs. Gentlemen, she said, spreading a large map across the table, let's be clear on what you're attempting. The Tlanica River route puts you 30 miles from the nearest ranger station. No cell coverage. No other campers this time of year. She tapped red markers on the map. Recent grizzly activity here, here, and here. 2 cubs were spotted last week, means a protective mother nearby. Wolves have been sighted, and moose can be extremely aggressive during spring territorial disputes. Mason leaned in, staring at the isolated sections like they were a puzzle to solve. What about emergency extraction? I asked. Helicopter rescue is possible, Walsh said. Weather permitting, but in bad conditions it could take days. Her stern expression left no room for misinterpretation. Too many overconfident visitors had ended up as statistics. And your experience level? She asked. I answered honestly about my military background. Mason mumbled vague references to camping with friends. Doubt was written across Walsh's face. Sir, respectfully, this route is not for beginners. We offer guided tours and shorter, safer trails. We'll be fine. Mason interrupted. Dad's practically a survival expert. After signing liability forms and watching mandatory bear safety videos, we rented bear-resistant food containers and emergency beacons. I insisted on a defensive rifle, a Remington 870 that felt natural in my hands. You sure about that? Mason asked nervously. Alaska rule number 1, never enter bear country unarmed. Our last task was programming GPS coordinates into the emergency beacon. Walsh demonstrated, pressing the activation button with exacting precision. Hold 5 seconds, and search and rescue receives your exact location. But even with coordinates, extraction could take 12 to 18 hours. Loading our packs into the truck, I felt that familiar pre-mission tension. Every detail screamed danger. The remote setting, Mason's lack of experience, his insistence on maximum isolation. Still sure about this route? I asked as we left the ranger station. Mason's smile seemed rehearsed. Absolutely. No turning back now, right, Dad? The words sounded less like encouragement, more like finality. Through the rearview mirror, the ranger station vanished behind the trees. Our last tether to civilization faded into wilderness that was quickly losing its allure of adventure and taking on the feel of a trap. The forest road narrowed, branches scraping the truck like skeletal fingers. GPS displayed our progress, deeper into unmarked terrain, past the last cell tower, beyond the final trail marker, into a landscape that had claimed the unprepared before. We're officially off the grid, I muttered as my phone bars vanished. Mason laughed, hollow. Perfect. Just us and the wild. At mile 23, the Tlanica River marked the end of the drivable road. I parked next to weathered wooden posts that looked more like grave markers in the dim afternoon light. Unloading our packs revealed the difference immediately, mine distributed efficiently, the product of decades of military experience, his, less organized, heavier in the wrong places. Mason fumbled awkwardly with gear he clearly hadn't tested. Jesus, this thing is heavy, he grunted, wrestling with the shoulder straps. Proper packing takes practice, I said, adjusting his load and noticing him flinch when I touched his right shoulder. You hurt yourself? Old injury, nothing serious, he muttered. The trail snaked through dense spruce, sunlight barely piercing the canopy. Moss-covered logs formed natural hurdles, and small streams demanded careful footwork on scattered stones. Signs of wildlife appeared almost immediately, deep moose tracks pressed into the mud, eagles calling high above, and distant howls hinting at wolves. You hear that? Mason froze, his face pale. The wolf pack's probably 5 miles out, I said, continuing forward. His tension wasn't about appreciating nature, it was genuine fear. For someone who'd insisted on this remote route, he seemed unprepared for its realities. 3 hours later, we reached a clearing beside a rushing creek, a perfect campsite with level ground, fresh water, and clear sight lines in every direction. Military instincts kicked in as I evaluated defensive positions and escape routes. Mason collapsed on a fallen log. How much farther? He panted. This is good for tonight. We push deeper tomorrow. Setting up camp highlighted Mason's inexperience. I methodically arranged the perimeter, hung food 12 feet up, positioned the cooking area downwind, and ensured emergency supplies were accessible. He wrestled with basic tent assembly. "Dad, can you help?" He held tangled guidelines like a white flag. Teaching him proper setup brought back memories of when he'd actually wanted to learn, rather than just inherit. But something nagged at me. Why insist on remote camping if he couldn't manage simple gear? The firelight danced across the clearing as I prepared a simple meal. Mason sat unusually still, staring into the flames with an unreadable expression. The temperature dropped sharply. March nights in Alaska demanded respect. "Remember when we used to do this?" I asked, attempting conversation, seeking some connection. "You were 10, roasting marshmallows until they caught fire. Mom was still alive then." His voice carried unexpected weight. "She loved camping. Said it brought out the best in people." Mason nodded, eyes distant. "Tell me about your childhood, Dad. Before the military, before the business, what was it like being poor?" The question caught me off guard. Mason rarely asked about my past. I began sharing stories I hadn't told in years, growing up in rural Montana, summers working farms, earning every dollar through sweat and effort. "Sounds hard," he said, his tone more calculating than sympathetic. "Hard work builds character. Teaches the value of earning what you have." A flicker crossed his face, resentment, maybe frustration, but his voice stayed neutral. "Lucky for me, right?" Skipping all that character building. Conversation flowed around the fire. Mason asked about military service, survival training, the skills that had kept me alive in hostile environments. I shared more than usual, encouraged by what seemed like curiosity. "How do you know when someone's lying?" he asked suddenly. "Body language, voice patterns, inconsistencies," I replied, poking the fire, sparks spiraling into the darkness. "Why?" "Just curious. You've always been good at reading people." Later, I banked the fire for the night. Stars emerged in patterns I hadn't seen since my last deployment, unmarred by city lights. The wilderness felt pristine, sacred. "I'll take first watch," Mason offered. "Not tired yet?" "Yeah, want to enjoy this. Listen to the forest." I crawled into my tent, trusting him to wake me for the second shift. Outside, I could hear normal camping noises, logs shifting, the crackle of embers, but something felt off. Mason had never shown interest in quiet reflection or nature appreciation. Why now? The last sound I noticed before sleep claimed me wasn't casual movement. It was deliberate stillness, like someone waiting rather than watching. Dawn's light woke me. Metallic clinks echoed outside. Too early, too precise for ordinary morning routines. I unzipped the tent and stepped into freezing air, breath clouding in white puffs. Mason stood by the truck, loading equipment with military-like precision he had never shown before. Every piece, GPS, emergency beacon, rifle, food, vanished into the vehicle. "What's happening?" I demanded. Mason froze, then straightened with defiance. "Getting ready to leave. We planned 3 more days." "Why the rush? Change of plans?" He avoided my gaze, continuing to pack. "Weather's turning bad." The lie lingered between us like smoke. Yesterday's weather had promised calm skies, and the horizon held no storm clouds. Yet instinct, long dormant since arriving in Alaska, screamed warnings. "Mason, talk to me. What's really going on?" Something broke in his face. Years of buried resentment surged like a dam giving way. "You want to know what's happening? I'm done. Done with your control, your manipulation, your constant judgment. Son, I don't understand." "Don't," he snapped. He spun around, fists tight. "Don't call me son. Sons aren't treated like employees. Sons don't beg for every dime while their father sits on millions." His words struck like physical blows. This wasn't fleeting anger, it was carefully nurtured hatred, simmering beneath our family's surface for decades. "I've given you everything," I protested. You've given me nothing. Mason spat, voice cracking with rage. You kept me weak, dependent, controlled every part of my life with your money. Well, I'm taking control now. Understanding hit me like a cold wave. The camping trip, everything, it had been a setup. Military genius, finally catching on. He said, a hollow laugh devoid of warmth. Took you long enough. Why, Mason? If you needed money, we could have worked something out. I don't want your handouts, Dad. I want what's mine by right. Your business, your assets, everything you've dangled over me for years. The frigid morning air felt like it had hardened around us. I stared at a stranger in my son's face, speaking words that shredded 20 years of paternal love. You're planning to leave me here. Exactly. I'm leaving you to figure things out. Maybe 30 miles of wilderness will teach you what real dependence feels like. My chest tightened. Mason, this is bear country, without gear, without GPS. You should have thought of that before turning me into your puppet. He slammed the tailgate. Maybe you survive. Maybe you don't. Either way, I get what should have been mine long ago. Please. My voice came out raw. Whatever I did wrong, we can fix it. Don't do this. For a fleeting moment, something passed across his face, doubt, or maybe a memory of affection. Then his expression hardened again, unrecognizable. Goodbye, Dad. He climbed into the driver's seat. Try not to meet the Grizzlies too soon. I want you time to think about what you made. The engine growled to life. I rushed forward, desperate to stop him, but he backed out, eyes cold and calculating, devoid of any familiar warmth. Mason! My shout echoed off the mountains as the truck disappeared around a bend. Dust swirled at my feet. The silence that followed was complete. No voices, no engines, just the wind through spruce and a distant hawk's cry. I stood motionless, absorbing the enormity of the betrayal. My son, the boy I had raised, protected, provided for, had sentenced me to death. The dust of his truck still hung in the air when instinct and training took over. Shock was a luxury I couldn't afford, not 30 miles from civilization in Grizzly country. I forced steady breaths, letting decades of Navy discipline regain control. Rule 1: Assess resources. Pockets yielded a wallet, house keys, and a small folding knife. No food, water, GPS, or beacon, only the clothes on my back. Rule 2: Assess the environment. March in Alaska meant sub-freezing nights. I was surrounded by dense spruce, unmarked trails, and utter isolation. Ranger Walsh's warnings replayed in my mind: recent grizzly activity, roaming wolf packs, unpredictable weather. Rule 3: Prioritize survival. Shelter, water, signaling, navigation. I gauged the sun's angle. East led deeper into wilderness, west toward the main park road. Fragments of topographical knowledge surfaced from ranger briefings. Rivers generally flowed northwest. Movement was critical. Standing still meant death. I headed west, following the faint tire tracks Mason had left. Within 100 yards, they diverged from an animal trail cutting through dense underbrush. Game trails often led to water, essential for survival and rescue visibility. Every step demanded focus. At 58, my knees complained, and my civilian body lagged behind my military prime. Anger kept me moving, rage at Mason, at my own blindness, at years squandered enabling his transformation into this monster. The forest pressed close, spruce towering overhead, dimming midday light. I broke branches for markers, a faint hope for future rescuers, though the chances seemed slim. Bear signs were everywhere: clawed trees, enormous paw prints, fresh scat. I made noise while moving, remembering Ranger Walsh's advice to avoid surprise encounters. The irony stung. My son had put me in a situation where the bears might be the least of my problems. Hours passed. My throat dried, then burned. The trail twisted deeper into dense undergrowth, and several times I lost it, backtracking to find the path again. Exhaustion crept into my legs, but stopping meant losing precious daylight. A distant noise made me freeze. Mechanical, steady, undeniably human, multiple engines. I stood motionless, listening. The sound came from the north, maybe half a mile away. ATVs or motorcycles, moving cautiously through the forest. Hunters, park rangers, or a search and rescue team. For the first time since Mason's betrayal, hope surged in my chest. I changed course, pushing through thick underbrush that snagged at my sleeves and tore at my pants. The engines grew louder, unmistakably all-terrain vehicles, moving slowly, deliberately. The forest began to open, and I caught glimpses of a clearing ahead. 200 yards away, the noise intensified. I abandoned stealth for speed, branches slapping my face as I pressed toward a possible rescue. Bursting through the final line of trees, I stumbled into a sunlit clearing. 4 ATV riders had paused, apparently for lunch. Their heads snapped up in shock as I emerged, dirty, scratched, ragged, clearly out of place in the remote wilderness. The lead rider, a bearded man in his 40s with the rugged look of someone at home outdoors, killed his engine and strode toward me, concern etched across his face. "Sir, what happened? Why are you out here alone?" My voice was hoarse from dehydration and stress. "My son, he left me here. Took all our equipment and drove off." The man's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. "He abandoned you? That's attempted murder. I'm William Harper. Mason brought me on a camping trip, then he took our truck and everything, said he was leaving me to die." The man removed his helmet, revealing sharp, calculating eyes. "I'm Oliver Reed, former park ranger. These are my friends. We're on a backcountry tour." The others circled around, their faces showing the mix of shock and horror experienced by serious outdoorsmen confronted with deliberate abandonment. A woman in her 30s handed me a water bottle. I drank greedily. "How long ago?" Oliver asked, his voice shifting to professional urgency. "This morning. Maybe 4 hours ago." Oliver exchanged glances with his companions. "We need to get you out of here immediately. Radio signal is limited, but from higher ground we can reach the ranger station. There's something else," he added, studying his GPS. "If your son stuck to the main road, he's looking at a 6-hour drive to Anchorage. But I know a shortcut, an old ranger trail through the backcountry. We can get you back to the park entrance in 90 minutes. The words hit me like electricity. I could get back before him. "Do you want to involve law enforcement immediately, or handle it differently?" Oliver asked. A hard resolve replaced the fear and desperation I'd carried since dawn. Mason had planned my death, assumed my helplessness, but he had underestimated both the wilderness community and my own survival instincts. "I want to reach the motel first," I said carefully. "Then I'll decide about the police." Oliver nodded in understanding. "Climb on behind me. We'll take the ranger trail. Your son won't see us coming." The ride revealed a side of Denali I'd never seen, a web of service trails, maintained for emergency access, known only to rangers and expert backcountry guides. Oliver navigated with quiet confidence. "I spent 15 years as a ranger here," he said over the engine's roar. "Seen a lot of careless mistakes, but deliberate abandonment? That's criminal." The terrain rushed past, creek crossings, steep inclines, fallen logs that forced us to dismount and guide the ATVs. Despite the rough route, we moved faster than I'd expected, emerging onto pavement well ahead of Oliver's estimate. The Denali Lodge Motel appeared in the distance. Its log cabin warmth was a welcome sight after the morning I'd spent in the wilderness. As we neared the parking area, I scanned for our rental truck. Not returned. "Looks like your son's still on the road," Oliver said. "You've got time to prepare whatever reception you're planning." The other travelers offered their contact info, promising to serve as witnesses if the situation ended up in court. Oliver handed me his card, scrawled with a personal cell and email. "Call me when you're ready to involve authorities. What your son did, there need to be consequences." As they prepared to leave, Oliver hesitated. "Sir, mind if I ask, what are you planning to do when he gets back?" I glanced at the motel room where our belongings sat and then at the legal documents still folded in my jacket pocket. Mason had spent years scheming my ruin. Now it was my turn. I'm going to give him exactly what he thinks he wants, I said quietly. Just not in the way he expects. Back in the motel room, I sank onto the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. Oliver's card lay beside me, a silent offer to contact authorities immediately. But first, I had to understand the battlefield I was facing. The legal papers I'd drafted back in Seattle now felt like prophetic tools, folded in my jacket like a loaded weapon. 3 weeks ago, in a surge of paternal disappointment, I had revised my will. Now, it seemed like premeditated preparation for war. I spread the documents across the desk, reading the precise language I had crafted with my attorney. Mason would inherit nothing. Every asset would go to wildlife conservation groups, veterans' charities, and a scholarship in Sarah's name. The irony was exquisite. His attempt to kill me for money would leave him with nothing. But legal papers alone weren't enough. I needed witnesses, evidence, consequences that would shadow him for life. I dialed Oliver. He answered on the first ring. William, settled in? All right. I need your help with something specific. When Mason returns, I want everything recorded, his reaction, his words, every detail. You confronting him before calling the cops? I'll give him what he thinks he's earned, I said. The chance to inherit my business, right until he realizes what he's actually done to himself. A pause. Then Oliver's voice. That's strategic. You want me there as a witness? If you're willing, and maybe bring that digital camera you used on the trail. Mason's going to say things that need preserving for a jury. What time you expecting him? I ran through his likely route, Main Park Road, Anchorage Highway, probable fuel stops, his cautious driving on unfamiliar roads. Between 9 and 10 tonight, he'd be tired, overconfident, expecting an empty room and a grieving father who never returned. Instead, he'd find me very much alive, and very well prepared. Oliver agreed to arrive by 8:30. I then called my attorney in Seattle. Brief but essential. Tomorrow morning, the revised will would be officially filed. The moment the courthouse stamped it, Mason's inheritance would vanish. Next, I reserved the adjacent motel room for Oliver. The desk clerk, an older woman who had seen decades of Alaskan drama, asked no questions. Evening settled with an almost surreal calm. I showered off the grime of the wilderness, changed into clean clothes, and organized the room meticulously. The legal documents lay spread across the desk where Mason would see them immediately. Oliver's camera was positioned with clear sight lines from the adjoining room. My phone was ready on speed dial for 911. Military training had taught me that preparation removed variables. Tonight, Mason would enter a controlled environment where every advantage was mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had spent months plotting my death in the wild. I was planning his social and financial downfall in civilization, alive, aware, accountable. At 8:15, Oliver knocked lightly. He entered, carrying professional photography gear, his expression grim, the look of someone who had witnessed too many wilderness tragedies. Audio and video devices were set up in the adjoining room. When he arrives, everything will be documented, he said. What happens legally once we hand this over? Attempted first-degree murder. Alaska takes abandonment in the wild seriously. It's effectively a death sentence with extra steps. With your testimony, my witness account, and whatever he says tonight, he's looking at serious prison time. I nodded, a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. Then we waited. Outside, darkness closed around the motel like a fist. Through the window, I could see the main road, where Mason's headlights would soon appear, driving him straight into a reckoning he could never have imagined. The phone read 8:47 p.m. Any moment now, my son would discover that the perfect crime he had planned had become his perfect downfall. Headlights swept across the motel parking lot, and the familiar rumble of our rental truck engine signaled Mason's return. He had come back from his failed attempt on my life, probably rehearsing sorrowful phone calls to report his father missing. I settled into the chair facing the door, legal documents laid plainly on the desk. Through the adjoining wall, I could hear Oliver adjusting his recording gear. Everything was in place. The key scraped the lock twice before turning. When the door opened, Mason stepped inside cautiously, the posture of someone expecting an empty room. The overhead light cast shadows across his face, and I watched recognition hit him like a punch. "Dad?" The word came out strangled, incredulous. "Hello, son. How was the drive?" His face flickered through confusion, disbelief, then something dangerously close to fear. How are you here? How did you get back? Turns out I'm harder to kill than you calculated." Mason's legs wobbled slightly. He gripped the doorframe, eyes scanning for an escape route. "I don't understand. I left you 30 miles from nowhere. No food, no water, no equipment." "I remember," I said conversationally, almost warmly. Interesting choice of last words, by the way. "Go meet the Grizzlies." Truly poetic. "Dad, wait! You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "You brought me to Alaska to murder me for inheritance. Spent months planning it, researched the most remote location possible, even rehearsed the shock son routine for when the authorities found my body." Mason's mouth moved without forming words. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening. "The problem with your plan," I continued, stepping forward deliberately, "is you underestimated the wilderness community. Turns out, people help each other survive instead of leaving family members to die. Look, if this is about money, it's always been about money for you," I added. "Now I see it. Every conversation, every camping trip, every moment I thought we were bonding, you were just calculating my net worth." I reached the desk and lifted the legal papers. "Want to know what's fascinating? 3 weeks ago, right after our fight, I changed my will. Called it paternal disappointment at the time." Mason's eyes locked on the papers. "What do you mean, changed?" "I mean you inherit nothing. Not the auto shops, not the accounts, not the house your mother loved. Everything goes to charities, wildlife preservation, veterans organizations, scholarships." His face drained of color. "You can't do that. I'm your son." "You were my son," I said calmly. "This morning you became something else. A man who plotted his father's death for financial gain. Dad, please, just listen." "I listened this morning," I said. "I heard how my controlling ways ruined your life. I heard how you believed I deserved to die alone in bear country. I'm done listening." Mason's composure collapsed. "You self-righteous bastard! You created this. Your control, your manipulation, keeping me dependent while judging everything I did. That's the real Mason Harper. You want to destroy me? Fine, but remember you shaped me into this. Every dollar, every condition, every manipulation, this is on you." A strange calm settled over me. "You're right. I did create this. I enabled your dependence, confused providing with parenting. That's my failure. Then change the will back. Fix it. The will was filed this afternoon. It's done." I walked past him, who looked smaller, diminished somehow. "But one thing you're wrong about, I didn't create your willingness to commit murder. That choice was entirely yours. Where are you going?" "To call the police. Attempted murder is still a crime, even when it fails." "Dad, wait." I paused at the threshold. "Goodbye, Mason. In a strange way, you've given me exactly what I needed, clarity about who you really are." The last thing I saw before stepping outside was my son collapsing into the chair, staring at the legal documents that now represented the total destruction of his plans. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the Anchorage Police Department interview room as Detective Sarah Martinez examined the evidence spread across the metal table: Oliver's recordings, my sworn statement, and Mason's own motel room confession. "Mr. Harper, I've investigated wilderness crimes for 8 years," she said. "This is the most deliberate attempted murder I've encountered." She clicked through the audio files. "Your son's statements are damning. He's always been meticulous when pursuing something. The district attorney will file charges this morning: first-degree attempted murder, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to commit fraud concerning your inheritance. Alaska doesn't take wilderness abandonment lightly. Through the interview room window, I watched Mason in handcuffs at the booking desk. Overnight in jail had stripped away his final pretenses. No charm, no manipulation, just a 28-year-old man facing the consequences of calculated evil. Oliver, having driven down from Denali, sat beside me to provide witness testimony. "What's the likely sentence?" I asked. 15 to 25 years, depending on plea negotiations. Alaska treats deliberate wilderness abandonment as equivalent to attempted murder. It's exactly that. I watched Mason through the glass, feeling an unexpected absence of triumph. This wasn't victory. It was the natural endpoint of years of entitlement and resentment. "Will you be returning to Seattle today?" Detective Martinez asked. "Tomorrow. I need to meet with my attorney first, finalize estate plans." She nodded knowingly. "Ensuring the new will is secure, among other things." I stood, gathering my jacket and evidence folders. "I'm establishing a foundation in my late wife's name. Seems fitting that Mason's inheritance should help those who truly deserve it." Oliver and I stepped out into the crisp morning air of Anchorage. Downtown traffic flowed at the familiar Alaskan pace, unhurried, deliberate, and practical. "What now?" Oliver asked. "Back to Seattle," I said. "Back to figuring out what kind of man I want to be in the time I have left." I gazed at the Chugach Mountains towering above the skyline. Surviving an attempt on your own life at the hands of your child gives a surprising clarity about what truly matters. "Are you planning to visit him during the trial?" Oliver asked. The question caught me off guard. I thought about it seriously, the lingering paternal instinct pulling me toward connection, clashing with the stark reality of what Mason had done. "No," I said finally. "The boy I raised died somewhere in those woods yesterday. What's left isn't my son anymore." We reached Oliver's truck in the parking lot. He handed me a business card with his contact info. "If you ever want to come back to Alaska for the right reasons, camping, fishing, actually enjoying the wilderness, call me. First trips are on the house." "Why would you do that?" I asked. "Because you survived something that should have killed you," he said. "And instead of letting it make you bitter, you're using it to help other people. That's worth supporting." I shook his hand, feeling genuine gratitude for a stranger who had become an unexpected ally. "Thank you for everything," I said. "Thank the wilderness community," he replied. "Up here, we look out for each other." As Oliver drove off, I pulled out my phone and called my attorney in Seattle. Foundations to establish, scholarships to fund, a lifetime of enabling to undo through positive action. Mason had tried to kill me for money, but instead, I'd learned to live with purpose. In attempting to destroy me, he had inadvertently taught me the difference between providing for someone and truly caring for them. The irony was sharp, and utterly just. 3 days later, back in Seattle, a letter arrived from Mason in jail. 5 pages of manipulation masquerading as apology, promising he could change if I reconsidered the inheritance, warning how prison would ruin his life. I read it once, then fed it through my office shredder. Some relationships don't survive attempted murder, no matter how much money has been poured into them. If you enjoyed this story, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left.